Hello, my name is Sylvia Robello, and I am one of the co-founders of Nueva Esperanza. I'm here today to tell my story of how Nueva started, but also to inspire those who would like to work in the community and volunteer to help our community rise above the levels that we currently find ourselves, although we're a lot better than we used to be. I came to Holyoke in the late 70s, hoping to find a better community than where I came from in New York City. I'm from the South Bronx, and all the buildings out there were being burned and torn down. And so I wanted something better so that I can raise my kids in a better environment. And so I came here thinking that, yeah, it was gonna be better, the schools would be better because it was a smaller community, and my kids would have a better opportunity rather than living in a ghetto that's mostly burned out and we don't know what's gonna happen next. And so I came also because of abusive relationship with my husband. And so I was trying to escape that. I just packed things one night. It was Mother's Day, I'll never forget. I packed my 4 children, a suitcase, and we were off. We got here like 5 o'clock in the morning. I had previously called my stepsister and I had asked her, what kind of community is Holyoke? She said, it's beautiful. There's houses everywhere. There's white picket fences. Of course, if you live in a city like New York City, that's full of crime and full of empty buildings and that are boarded up and it looks more like a war zone, you want to go to a place like that. You want something better for your children. And so I said, yeah, Maria, I'm going down. Expect me sometime tonight. When I reached Holyoke, it was 5 o'clock in the morning. So I didn't see much of Holyoke. I came to live on South Beach Street in South Holyoke. When I woke up in the morning, I was dying to see what the neighborhood looked like. I looked out the window and I wanted to cry. Right across the street, all the buildings were boarded up. It looked more like a war zone. They were burned, some of them were boarded up. There was nothing there except a bar. The bar was an old man's bar. Remember, this is the 70s and women weren't allowed in that bar. And so I said, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? I went from the pan to the frying pan. But I was determined not to look back, especially coming from an abusive relationship. So I stayed with my sister for a couple of months and I couldn't take it anymore. There was like 8 of us living in a 2-bedroom apartment. And so I talked to the landlady and there was an apartment in that building that had been burned out. And I had brought all my furniture, had gone back, picked up my furniture in New York, and even the dog came back with me. And I asked her, if I cleaned up the apartment, can I get it? And she says, yeah, if you clean it up and take out all the smoke, clean it all up, you can have it. So that's what I did. Before that happened, her husband threw me out with my kids, and I slept that night in Springdale Park. My son was only like a year and a half, and I remember holding him. I was sitting on a bench, and it was cold. It was the end of October, and he's saying, Mommy, I'm cold. And I said, oh my goodness, what am I gonna do? It just broke my heart. So I walked back to South Holyoke on Southbridge Street, and I went into the empty apartment that she had given me that we hadn't finished yet. And I lived there. I fixed the apartment, it was gorgeous. Eventually, I got a job at the Holyoke Welfare Department that was on Southbridge. And one night, we were sleeping and I smelled smoke. And I remember I had gone to sleep and I had washed some clothes and put them on the heater, so I thought maybe they were burning. And when I looked, it wasn't, so then I got a knock on the door. There's a fire in the building, you gotta get out. So I ran out with my 4 kids, And we ran out the back door. We didn't take anything. I was just with a nightgown, and it had snowed that day, and I didn't even have on slippers. My daughter and my kids were all in pajamas. And so the fireman came and said, we have to close the building. So my dog ran away. And so the cops came and said, do you want to go to a shelter? And I said, no, because I came from New York, and in New York, there are no shelters. The shelters are terrible. There's rats, roaches, whatever, and I wasn't gonna go there. So he says, well, do you have any place you can go? And I remember that I had met Carlos Gonzalez's family. They were the first people I met here, and they lived like 2 blocks away on Parker Street, which is now Roberto Comenzi. So I went and I said, his sister, I said, Hilda, we worked together at the Holyoke welfare. And so can I stay here? The building burned. And she said, yeah, you can stay here till you can, find a place. So I stood with her, and I remember getting into, the cop said, can I take you somewhere? And I said, yeah, take me to my girlfriend's house. And all 4 kids and me piled into the police car. And all of a sudden I seen my dog. And I had a big shaggy dog, beautiful, I loved him. I had brought him with me from New York, and I said, my dog, we gotta get my dog. He turned around to me and said, lady, we don't fit here. We can't fit a dog in here. I said, no, I can't leave my dog behind. And so I took the kids over to Hilda and came back and got my dog. So I stood with Hilda like 2 months. In the meantime, everybody in the building, they were putting them in the flats. And I had heard gross stories about the flats, that it was a bad place to live. There was a lot of drugs, a lot of crime. So I said, I don't want to go to the flats. So they gave me an apartment in Lyman Terrace. And I moved there with my kids, and I was really happy having moved there. In the meantime, before all this even happened, one day I look out the window and I seen someone giving clothes out. And that was strange to me, because in New York, you don't see nobody giving anything out. And so I went downstairs, right on Southbridge, on the corner of Hamilton and Southbridge. There was all these tables and all these nice clothes. So I asked my sister, do you wear this? And she says, yeah, they're good clothes. I said, I'm not gonna wear secondhand clothes. I've never thought of using secondhand clothes. She says, don't be silly. Why pay a lot of money when you can get it for free and it's just as good? I said, who's doing this? And they said, oh, we don't know. It's this guy with a beard, And I said, really? Well, when he comes, will you let me know? So the following week, he showed up, and they came, Sylvia, he's here. Come and talk to him. And so when I went, it was Carlos Vega. And I said, Carlos, my name is Sylvia Robello. I'm from New York City. I moved here with my sister just a week or so ago, and I'm really interested about what you're doing. He says, yeah, we work out of the Survival Center, if you're willing to volunteer. And I said, of course. He says, do you have an education? I said, yeah, I have 2 years of college. I started at Lehman College in the Bronx, but unfortunately I had to come here. He says, don't worry, I'll help you. We'll help each other. And so we're working from the Survival Center, which was a store right on the corner of South Summer and Hamilton. No heat, no nothing. And there was that storefront was right next to the store. And Hipólito Campos was the one that owned it. And he was one of the first families to come to Holyoke. When I came to Holyoke, very few Hispanics lived here. Maybe there was like 10, 15 families. You rarely saw any Hispanics. No Hispanics would walk High Street. Like, it just wasn't allowed. It was taboo. And on High Street, anyone that walked, especially if she was a woman, they would look at her. I mean, this was a town mainly made of white individuals, Anglos, very few people ethnic from other groups. Blacks hardly ever came out, and there was only a handful of black families. The city council was made up of all Anglo people, no Hispanics, no blacks, no nobody. So we were up against a lot, Carlos and I. Of course, Carlos and I clicked off right away. Carlos lived on Hamilton Street with his wife, Jane. And Jesse hadn't been born, their son hadn't been born yet. And so we started working. And we started this newspaper called The Thorn, La Espina, where we would get on the backs of all these political people and the municipalities and all the things they were doing against South Holyoke. At that time, there was a master plan out to tear down South Holyoke to make it industrial park. So the landlords refused to fix their buildings. And so they would burn them down or close them up, start fixing, they wouldn't fix the water, they wouldn't fix lights. Some of them would turn off their water and lights so that people would move out. Then the people up the hill were saying, oh, look what the Hispanics have done. Look what the Puerto Ricans have done. They've destroyed those apartment buildings down there, and we had nothing to do with it. We had nothing to do with the deterioration and the fires. We were considered in Holyoke, South Holyoke area and the flats, we were considered the fire capital of the world, because every week we had 2 or 3 fires. Every week something got burned or something got demolished or something got abandoned and boarded up. One day, Carlos finally got a grant from me through Urban Ministries to start a recreational program through the Survival Center, to start a group with kids in the community to give them something to do, give them recreations, to teach them some skills. And I said, yeah, I'll do it. Back then it was only $10,000, but to me at that time, a year, that was a lot of money. We're talking about the 70s, I said, yeah, sure, I'll do it. So one day I was working and this lady came running to me and she tells me, listen, my name is Simone Pelletier and I lived in that corner building. The landlord wants to close it and wants us to move. There's only 2 families living there. She says, I was born in that building. I am not moving. He shut off our water. He shut off our light. By then it was like the end of October, the beginning of November. It was really cold. He says, they left the hydrant open for us so we can get water. She says, can you help me save the building? I said, I don't know anything about that, but I'll talk to Carlos about it. So the next day Carlos came. And we had no heat at the survival center either. I don't know how I survived that year without getting pneumonia or dying, because it was freezing, even in the winter. And so I told Carlos, this lady lives in that building, and there's another Hispanic family that lives there. And the landlord shut off their water and their electricity, and they're getting water from the hydrant. She wants us to save the building and buy it. So Carlos looked at me and said, Sylvia, what the heck do we know about housing? We don't know nothing about housing. He says, I can't do it. And I said, I'm so sorry, they can't keep living this way. We gotta do something. And Carlos said, no, I'm sorry. Meanwhile, buildings are burning back and forth. Every week we had some kind of fire. One day I go in and I smell smoke, because I was living up in Lyman Terrace. And back then there was no internet, no Facebook, no nothing. So we had to wait till the news come on so that we would know what was going on in the city or wherever. And we had a newspaper called the Transcript, but it had happened that night. So I smelled smoke and I said, oh my God, what else burned down? So the kids came running and said, Miss Robello, do you know what happened? I said, what? He said, they paid Froggy $25, this landlord, to burn a building, and a mother and 4 children died in the fire. And I said, oh my goodness. I went down there, the building was all burned out. And there were people looking, and then Carlos came with Jane, and And it was devastating. By then, Carlos had moved up to Cabot Street. And so he didn't live in the neighborhood anymore either, and he didn't know about it till he heard it on the news. So at that point, Carlos looked at me and I said, we need to save these buildings. So we decided, it was the first 2 buildings that we acquired was the one on the corner of South Summer and Hamilton, and then the one adjacent to that on Hamilton and South Summer. And so I said, Carlos, we have no money. He said, that's right, but we're gonna make it work, right? So we went to Community Savings Bank, which was on the corner. It's still there, the bank is still there, but it's no longer a bank, it's now a church. It's on the corner of Appleton and Main Street. And so we went to Efrain Martinez, who at the time was the vice president of the bank. And we told him we wanted $10,000. He said, what? For what? I said, well, the landlord told us we want to buy these 2 buildings, and the landlord told us it was $5,000 a piece. He was willing to sell it to us. He says, well, what do you have for collateral? And I just laughed. I said, listen, I have no car. He said, do you have a house? No, I live in the projects. Carlos didn't have a car either. He rented an apartment. So we had no collateral. He says, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I said, no, but we have to save this building. And we pleaded with him. And he said, no, he says, but there's a loophole. He says, if you can find someone that will give you $10,000, or at least give you a letter of commitment, we'll match it with $10,000. And so we knew a lot of people that were very affluent in Holyoke, and so we went to them. And one of them was Dr. Burke. And I remember walking into his house, and I had never seen such a beautiful house, 22 rooms. I mean, it was grand, it was beautiful, for them alone. And so we spoke to him, and he said, yeah, I'll give you a letter of commitment for $10,000. So that's how Nueva got started in 1979. And so we went to Efrain. Efrain gave us the money, and we bought the building. Mind you, we did not know anything about how to put on light, nothing. We knew nothing about housing. We managed to get some funds to turn on the electricity again and their water. At least the building was safe, you know. By then, I was pregnant for my son, my youngest son. And so I decided to work with Chief Bartlett from the fire department, to sit with him all night in a car to make sure those buildings didn't burn, because there was no arson squad back then. And so I would leave my kids with my husband, because by then I had already met my son's father, and I would sit in a car. Then I got, you know, I was pregnant and going to school at the same time. So I would sit in the car with him, watching the buildings, making sure nothing got burned. And at 4 in the morning, I would go home, sleep for about an hour or 2, get the kids up for school, and then I would go. I was going to UMass at the time. Then I had my son. I had to quit school. I had to quit UMass. I quit school. While I was doing that, I was also a journalist for the Collegiate, okay? So, and working in the community. So it was my kids, you know, I was pregnant, had a newborn baby, you know, I mean, it was crazy. And now that I'm older, I think back and I say, my God, how did I do all of that? Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's crazy. So I did this for a little while while Galen was born, and he was a few months old. Then eventually they started the arson squad. They got some funds, the fire department, and I quit that. But then you know, my commitment to Nueva has always continued, you know, and so then it was, let's get Nueva incorporated. What did we know about that? Again, nothing. And so we decided to hire a director. So we put up the ad to get somebody hired as director. And for months, we sat, you know, going through resumes, going through interviews, and nobody seemed perfect, you know. And of course, everyone would look to me, well, what do you think? No. And some people look, a resume was great, they dressed great, I mean, they looked perfect. And when they came in and once they opened their mouth, they just didn't seem right for what we needed. you know. So one day we're going through resumes, like I would get out of work, go home, cook supper, and grab one of my kids and drag them to a meeting. No, and go through, no, mommy, I don't want to go. It's boring. I'm not going to go. Yes, you're going. Come on. And I would take them with me to relieve the burden on my husband, because by then he was taking not only care of the other four, the older ones, he was taking care of the newborn too. So I would take like Darlene with me. Come, my oldest daughter, who is now involved in the community too, even though she hated it back then. So, I mean, life, you know, goes full circle. So we were going through these resumes, and I seen this one resume. And the resume was, I will not lie, and I love you, Miguel. It was full of errors. But I looked beyond that, and I looked between the lines. And he had all the qualifications we were looking for. Plus, he was bilingual, which was a plus. And on top of that, he came from the same neighborhood that I had come from in New York. And he had worked with the same great organization that I worked with in New York. So I said, this is who we're going to interview. So we scheduled 3 interviews, and we left Miguel for last. We did that. By then, Betty had come into the community. She came from East Long Meadow. She was smitten with Holyoke. And Betty Lettenstein decided she was coming into Holyoke to stay, you know. And so she had an office where the health center is now on Maple Street, but on the corner, on Dwight. And so she let us use the office to do the interviews. So everyone, you know, this one guy came in, he had a suit, he was very impressive, but when he talked, that was not what we wanted. By then, we were holding interviews for about 6 months. That's how many, you know, resumes we went through. Then Miguel comes in, and I said, oh my God. He had on a humongous afro with thick glasses, and I said, what did we get into? But let's see, let him talk. When he opened his mouth, I knew instantly that that's what I wanted, you know, and I kept shaking my head, and everybody kept looking at me. So we said, well, we'll let you know. Now, mind you, we were holding interviews without having any money to pay a director. So we didn't tell him that at first, okay? And I said, well, we'll let you know, whatever. So when he left, I said, this is who was right. Well, how I know that this is the person who we need. You know, he was a housing specialist. He had worked in New York. New York is not an easy place to work in, especially in the South Bronx at that time. So I knew this is who we needed, because to me, Holyoke is a microcosm of the South Bronx. You know, it was exactly the same. The only thing in terms of area, it was a lot smaller. So we decided on Miguel. And so we called him, and we said, we want you to come in for a second interview. So during that second interview, we told him, we have no money to pay you. If you want money, you have to look for grants and pay yourself. And he says, I'm willing to do that. And so he was living in New York City at the time, and he had a wife. Her name is Gloria Arce. We used to call her Cookie, another sweetheart, you know. And he was Mexican. He's a Mexican-American from New Mexico. And he had transported himself to New York and was working there for a while. And so he said, in 6 months, I will have grants for myself. And so he did that. He committed himself to 5 years. So by then, this was already 1981. Okay, my son was 2 years old. I did a big mural on Ippolito's store that had a hand, and on the hand there was the mother and the 4 children with a crane coming to save her. It had doves on it, and it said, God, please save our people, okay? So then the real hard work started, you know. He said, I will get you grants, I will get you to where you are, and in 5 years I would leave, you know. And I didn't think it was gonna work as well as it did, okay? They made me, the day that they did the bylaws and decided on, well, with the offices and who was gonna be president, vice president, or whatever, I was made clerk because I was not there and no one wanted to be the clerk. I was at school that day. I had my midterms and I couldn't be in. So when I got home, they said, Sylvia, guess what? You're the clerk of the corporation. No, I don't want that. Why couldn't I be vice president or something? Nope, nobody wants to be clerk. You're clerk. And we can trust you anyway. So from then on, for about 3 or 4 years, they would come to me and wherever I was, look for me to sign checks over or whatever. It was a nightmare. But anyway, in the meantime, there was this woman that had died in the flats. And she was 2 years, like all day, dead on her kitchen table. And no funeral would take her. And so we also used to work with the Broderick House, the Sisters of St. Joseph and of Sister Margaret, and with Sister Margaret. And the reason why no funerals would take her was because the funeral parlors that were local said, we won't take any more Hispanic families because we don't like the way they grieve. There's too many people that attend and we refuse to take them. So I spoke with Sister Margaret and we decided to open the Broderick House to house the Hispanic, have their wakes there that died, okay? In the meantime, while we were preparing that, my best friend was living with me and I got the news that her brother had been killed in the steps coming down from that they tore down where the train station is that used to come down from the flats to Main Street. He was coming home one night from work about 11 o'clock and he got stabbed like 22 times. And I got the news and I had to tell her. So he was the first person that we watched there, you know. So that for me was iconic, you know. So, you know, I mean, this is just the start of it. There is so much more and I hope that at least you get an overview of what Holyoke was back then and why we started Nueva. Maybe in the next time I'll tell you why we have the symbols we do, why it's called Nueva, some of the things that had to go on to break that racial barrier. You know, my work was cut out for me. Eventually, I had to retire because I was losing everything. I was losing my family. I didn't have time for my family. They were now teenagers and they were getting lost in the community. So until next time, bye. Hope you enjoyed it.